And Annie Pluto is the author of a new book, fairly new book of poetry, Benign Protection. And I'm going to read from her bio, okay?
All right.
Anne Elizabeth Pluto. I thought that was a typo, Elizabeth.
No, my father spelled it that way. There's no I's in Russian.
Okay.
He used all E's.
Is a professor of literature and theater at Lesley University in Cambridge, Mass. And she's the artistic director and founder of the Oxford Street Players, the university's Shakespeare troupe. She's alumna of Shakespeare Company, has been a member of the Worcester Shakespeare Company. She's a member of the Boston small press scene in the late 80s, as one of the founders, editors of the Nick's Mate Review, and we did interview, Michael McGinnis earlier. Her chapbook, The Frog Princess, was published by White Pine Press, and was published by her ebook, Lubach Electric, by Argotis Press, and her chapbook, Benign Protection, by our mutual friend and great press, Gloria Mendock's Savannah Barber Press. She's been in the Buffalo Evening News, Mad Hat Literary Review, Mockingbird Heart Review, Naugatuck Review, and Tuesday in Art Project. I remember that. It's no longer. It was a very, well done. So I was going to ask you, I was, reading your book, and you seem to be sort of a master of absence. You populated absence with things that represent absence. Your father, mother. I was reading these things. Maybe you could just comment on that.
Well, the book is, I would say, an homage to grief on the death of my parents.
Okay.
So my father died in 2004, and then my mother died in 2012.
Right.
And I was writing poetry about my father, and then as my mother was dying, I was writing about her, and then after she died, I had all these things that came from their rent-controlled Brooklyn apartments where they had lived for 50-something years.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of stuff, and the things started to represent them. So that was the absence of them, that they went into the objects.
Okay.
And then when I would go back to Brooklyn, I would always stay with friends who lived close by, so I would walk to their street, but I would never go down it because it's a dead-end street, and I always felt like it's really odd to walk down a dead-end street and then, walk right back up it. And I don't think I wanted to see the building, even though the superintendent, she invited me to come to the apartment to see what they had done, and I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So for me, it was to, evoke my grief, my loss of my parents, and their stories, because they have interesting stories.
What did they do?
Well, my father had this fascinating life, and it was in one of the poems called I Have Been to Samarkand. So they were Russian but lived in Poland, and they lived 5 miles.
Oh, that was sort of interchangeable.
Soviet
Yeah. Pale of settlement type of thing.
Yeah, and they. My father was in the Polish army. He was a blacksmith, and he didn't see my mother from 1938 to 1951 in Toronto, where they married then. But they grew up in that village, and
right.
He had this war journey, being a prisoner of war in the Soviet prisoner of war camp, and they went from Kiev to Tashkent, and then he was on the last transport that joined the British Army that were allowed to in the Middle East. So he had this Middle Eastern journey that led to Alexandria in Egypt and then to Italy. So he ended the war in Italy, and the British told these Polish soldiers, do not go back, you will probably be shot. Mm-hmm. So my father went to Canada.
Okay.
And he and my mother, believe it or not, found each other. She thought he was dead. They wrote a letter.
Wow, quite.
Yeah, it's a great story, and then they married in Toronto, and he had to wait a year to come to America.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
And then I started uncovering things in their papers. Oh. So I tend to think my father had Canadian citizenship.
Yeah.
And that's the next thing I want to
write about.
Well, find out about. See,
like,
what does it mean? Could he have had dual citizenship in the U.S. also? I don't know.
Okay. Now, you work at the Oxford Street Players. You formed it, didn't you? Yeah.
I'm one of the founding mothers.
Right.
There were two of us.
And we know, O'Neill was a poet, and August Wilson was a poet before he really got into playwriting, and How do those work? I mean, does it the one feed the other? I'm sure. I know Shakespeare is a poet, right?
Yeah, they dovetail. But I think what's more interesting about my relationship to theater and my relationship to poetry is that theater's very it's group oriented. You know, it's very interconnected. You work with people all the time. And as a director and a professor, obviously I'm in charge of many things, including my vision of the play. And then poetry is, you pull back. You're with yourself. And I feel that those are the two things I desperately need in my life.
It's
that time alone to write, and then that big time with other people and being in the theater. And I really love the theater. And I love Shakespeare.
Okay.
Deeply, deeply, deeply love it.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's obvious. Now, what did I ask you? You studied, and it turns out we were probably there in the same time. Maybe I was having a beer next to you somewhere. But in Buffalo during the 70s, do you remember you weren't up there for the 76 blizzard, were you?
I was.
Oh, you remember that?
I was,
yeah.
Yes. And we got stuck in the dorms.
It was like unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was like snow whale. But anyway, one night I was drunk. I remember I almost got lost in a snowbank. But anyway, so you were in Buffalo, and they have a great small press collection there. I put all my stuff there. We both know Mike Basinski. I think he retired or something like that from being the curator there. Yeah. And Buffalo, many people might not know. They always think of New York or Boston, but Buffalo has the great small press scene. Tell me what it was like there.
It was very friendly. I did not feel that it was competitive. I mean, I was a
like
young
New York,
person.
Right.
Yeah, it wasn't competitive. People weren't mean. I would say people were more interested in helping each other. And, I was young, so I felt like I had a lot of mentors. And Dennis at White Pine Press, when I was leaving Buffalo, he said I wanted to do a book. And it took me a couple of years to get him a manuscript, but that was my first book, was White Pine. And now White Pine is a very big, distinguished small press at this point.
And at that time, it was
small.
It was small.
It was small.
Was it a cooperative or anything like Ellis James type of thing?
No, I don't think it was. I think Dennis was always the owner, proprietor, editor. And then he added somebody, and I don't remember who did translations, but now I can't remember who that was.
And you studied with Robert Creeley, you told me?
Yes.
And I know Mike Basinski was very influenced by him, and you also Irving Feldman. Tell me about Creeley or Feldman.
Creeley was very straightforward. He would get very annoyed at us. I had him for literature classes, too, for, like modern American poetry.
He failed as a novelist, I know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he couldn't do it, yeah.
Well, I can see why.
Yeah.
His poetry is tight.
Yeah.
He was generous.
Right.
He was very generous, and I had won this contest in 1986. It was Robert Creeley and 5 New Voices, and we just had the 30th anniversary of it last winter. And it was myself and 4 men, young men at the time, who were poets, and it never struck me then that I was the only woman. It's an odd thing, but when I went back and we had the reading at Medaille College, I thought, wow, this really was a big thing, and I didn't think of it at the time.
You said Creeley got annoyed with you?
No, he didn't get annoyed with me. He would get annoyed with the undergrads in his classes if we didn't do the reading.
Oh, yeah. I would get annoyed.
Yeah, but I remember him really getting mad once, and he told us all to leave.
He what?
Told us all to go.
Oh, really?
He closed the book, this giant book of, like, American poetry.
Yeah, as a teacher, that can be frustrating.
Oh, I've done it.
Yeah. You've closed the book?
I've closed the book and said, you can leave now.
I have had one guy, a friend of mine, Thomas O'Leary, is a poet who threw a table across the room, but I don't know if I do that.
I wouldn't do that. No, Creeley didn't throw tables. Neither did Irving Feldman nor John Logan. They didn't throw tables.
Now, you worked at Shakespeare Company. You were there with Tina
Packer.
Yeah, Tina Packer.
She's amazing.
It did change your life.
Yeah.
So before that, were you very engaged in theater, or is this sort of the catalyst for you to become?
I was I did a lot of theater as a little girl in Brooklyn, and I was actually a radio actress on WNYE. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
What's in the News?
Oh, no, I don't remember that one, but I remember Long John Neville and all those people on radio who I loved, listened to radio. Yeah.
Well, there was a New York City Board of Ed station,
Yeah.
and it ran out of
Yeah.
Brooklyn Technical High School.
Right.
So when I was in high school, I went on the audition, and I, made it. So we met every Monday, and we did these these staged readings.
Right, wonderful.
For
Yeah.
the radio. And I really wanted to be an actor, but my parents, immigrant parents, were really against it.
Right, they wanted something practical.
Practical, yeah.
Were you unhappy as a little professor of literature?
No, but I was writing some fiction, and a friend of mine who's a director, he was at Shakespeare Company. We lived in Allston then, and I used to run into him a lot. And he said, "You got to go to Shakespeare Company." He goes, "You just started writing this piece, and you're teaching Shakespeare again." And he really helped, and I went, and it was so hard. It was so difficult, and yet I felt like, this is what I really
Do you ever
do.
present playwrights, other than Shakespeare?
No, not at Leslie. It's more budgetary than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So the Oxford Street Players, we've done Shakespeare, we've done Marlowe, we did Afra Ben, we did The Rover.
You do any contemporary people?
No, I haven't done that. No. I
Mm.
only do the Elizabethan. And
Okay, that's your
Jacobean.
specialty.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to do a contemporary play.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I've worked for Playwrights Platform, and I've directed contemporary pieces for them like 20 years ago.
Oh, okay. Now, I was going to ask you. Now, you were in Allston in the '80s. I was in Allston in the '80s on Glenville Avenue.
I lived on Reedsdale Street, so 3 blocks away.
Oh, you remember Nick's Barber? Well, you wouldn't go to Nick's Barber Shop, but
No.
because then, but
Didn't go to
I
Nick's
just went in
Barber
here. But then it had those sort of that bakery with erotic. Do you remember that?
Oh, Sweet and Nasty.
Yeah,
Yes.
Sweet and Nasty. I lived
Yeah,
right around there.
that, yeah.
But anyway, you were in the small press scene there when Michael was talking about it, and I interviewed years ago Pagan Kennedy also, who was in that scene as well. Tell me a bit about the milieu.
Oh, God, where to begin?
A long time ago, but
It's a long time ago. So I had sent my work to a little magazine called Oak Square. And the editor...
That's what Michael sent his stuff to that too.
Yeah, Michael had a magazine named Nightmares of Reason.
Mm-hmm.
And then Philip Bornstein had Oak Square, and he took my poem, and then we met, and I really wanted to get involved, and be part of it. So I came on board, and I was the poetry editor with him. He was, the publisher, and he's a computer person, so he was doing this electronic layout, but we still used to wax the boards, and send it to a printer. And then Michael opened a bookstore in the Allston Mall that was on Brighton Avenue.
Yeah, he's talking about that, yeah.
And I lived a block away. So
what were you doing at that time?
I was teaching.
At Leslie?
At Leslie,
Yeah.
It was 30 years ago. Yeah.
And so what was it like, the scene?
It was pretty wild.
Different than Buffalo, right?
Very different because it was a lot of zines, a lot of small paper magazines that were stapled. The Buffalo scene was different. These were people really trying to get together a press.
Mm-hmm.
It was more, what would the word be? I don't know, do-it-yourself type of publishing. But there were a lot of people writing. And married to it was the punk rock scene.
Yeah,
so
right,
that
right.
was on the periphery. So writers and these punk musicians, we basically lived in the same neighborhood, went to the same
Went
bars,
to the Rathskeller.
We went to the same places for late breakfast on Sunday. So people lived with certain people, they were their roommates. So it was a really interesting group of people.
Mm-hmm.
It was an inspiring time.
Okay.
It really was.
Now you started, you're the co-founder of Nick's Mate? And tell us about that genesis of that.
It's a good story. I don't know if Michael's his version might be different, so it's maybe a little bit of a Rashomon.
I forget what he said. But yeah.
Philip, Michael, and I have always kept in touch, even long after all these magazines and the bookstore,
Right.
and people got married, divorced, had babies, whatever. And Facebook was instrumental in starting poetry groups. So Michael and we talked, and I said, I really would like to start a magazine. Would you be interested? So he really was. He was thinking the same thing. And then we called Philip, and he was thinking the same thing. So we met a few times. Philip worked downtown then, so we would meet and walk to Fort Point Channel for lunch.
Before it became a massive seaport.
Yeah, and we talked and just put something together. And then Michael does beautiful layout, like really, really beautiful layout. Philip is the computer genius, with the writing.
Oh, that's
code.
great, yeah.
And, I bring my editing piece with me and the creative piece. So we make a good threesome. We're close friends.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah,
chemistry.
We know each other's quirks. We, forgive each other's stuff. So,
right.
So far, so good.
You also involved with Common Thought magazine?
Yeah, I started that at Leslie, so it's going to be.
Is it an undergraduate journal?
Yeah. But we're going to branch out a little bit. It'll be 30 years next year.
Wow.
And they've just digitized all the past issues, and they're now in a archive.
Internet archive also?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I put a lot of stuff on that. It's a great thing, the Internet archive. This interview will be archived as well.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
But this is through Leslie.
Through Leslie.
They have an archivist, and he and I met, and he was very excited. And I found these letters that went along with the first issue, and just really, it's very exciting for me. Yeah,
I love it. Ibbotson, has been around for 20 years, and I keep all the sort of any notes that I think are significant or anything. I got it all, in there in case anyone. There's a new. I don't know if I was telling you, but there's a new small press, Boston area small press collection started at UMass Boston under the Sid Corman collection and Mark Pollack. You should ask him about that if you have a lot of, because you're an old Boston person. So I'd like you to read from your work, whatever you choose. You've got about 11 minutes. That would be great.
So this is the title poem from Benign Protection, and this is for my friend Paula. It's a Brooklyn friend. In the late spring, June, before summer descends, haze and mirage, my father's death left a hole in the pattern, deep and unfathomable. I reached forward to make meaning, and we met at your office in Columbus Circle, the Green Park beckoning, tourists, natives, and thieves. We walked to the restaurant. Close by, whose name I can't recall, a diner on 57th Street in the cool, dark booth, the red leather banquettes, menus sized like the Times. I've always wondered how they cooked so many dishes in the hidden kitchen. We have a glass of wine, white and crisp, order food that quickly comes, and my missing father, enlightened by death, wore the 20th century like a map. I am tracing the route in our conversation. You lost your father at 14 in the summer before 10th grade. We met once in the cold moon, starry winter on the corner of Marlborough and Church, in front of the Temple Beth Emeth, us, girls in our maxi coats, yours forest green and belted, mine black as every coat I ever bought, our fathers standing in benign protection. On the verge, in my reckoning, the ghosts of childhood remain, incredulous and strong, silent and long-suffering, beautiful and awful as memory herself. And I'd like to I think there's just time probably for one more, I'm assuming.
Time of what?
Time for one more poem? Or
No, you have. Like I said, you had 11 minutes.
Oh,
so you have plenty of time.
Okay. So this one's my father. He was a blacksmith, and he was a real horse whisperer type blacksmith.
Did he blacksmith in this country?
He was trained, in Poland, and then in America, he actually worked for Detective Scales. He worked in metal all his life. But in the summers, we spent the summers on a farm in Connecticut. It was my mother's godmother, believe it or not, because my mother was born in this country and taken back. But he found a stable where I could ride, and he would shoe the horses
No,
for
wow.
more time.
You must have been.
Yeah, he was good. He was
Yeah.
good. So this is called Summer for my father.
Okay.
I want to memorize this, our time together, what we did without her there to tell me, you wouldn't want this life, you're not cut out for it. And me, the child holding the reins of an unruly horse, as he took off its shoe and examined its foot, before putting the new one in place for riding far away. From the dirt I had pulled carrots shaped like mandrakes, or had stolen sour apples that fell beneath the huge tree where yellow and green caterpillars hung like earrings in the twilight, or sugar I'd taken from the box in the pantry when she wasn't looking. It was a fortune of smuggled goods with which to win them over, to keep them still and nudging me for more while you attended to their hoofs. She tells me what to do, miraculously knows if I've lost something she has given me, as I should only like what she had, and I don't care. I take these things and wait for prescience to cover me like a blanket. She misses you and wants to die. You are in every dream she has. They fill her up to being young, and upon waking she reaches backwards to you, left only with the bed half empty. I'm dying to be honest and sit her down to listen finally to me, to see me as I truly am. It's almost hopeless, and I cannot bear her cursing in 3 languages. For all the good it does her, it sends me into silence. I've charted the stars to find the constellation of forgiveness, its open milky light inviting me forward, to resurrection, to love, to the familiar made over against the odds of time and space. I've memorized this now, the young girl, her long hair slipping from the braids, the mandrake carrot in her open hand, the unruly horse tamed and looking at her with trusting eyes, and her blacksmith father whispering in Russian, hold him tight.
Now you grew up Russian Orthodox, right?
Yes.
And so you're steeped in, the poems are steeped with a lot of that ritual and things like that. Are you religious yourself? Or?
No.
No. That's not like I'm Jewish. I'm not I'm a cultural Jew, but not a...
My mother was severely allergic to the incense, so we never went to church.
Oh, okay.
But I was baptized in this beautiful church in Brooklyn. It's it's off of the BQE in Greenpoint. You can see the dome. It's a landmark.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a big church person, so let's do one for my mother. Right, this is called Mother Tender. Rain brings you back, June and blooming, darkness looming behind, summer ahead, sticky green and hot air. In nostrils you pick me up, each last day of school, humidity hanging after the June shower, polka-dotted umbrella I let go of once to see it fly like Mary Poppins, landing on a lawn nearby. Woolworths for notions and summer, books' shiny covers for Louisa May, the pages unfold like dust. Long lost in faithful timing, notice the rhyming, the hiding mother tender, stumbling over, reaching, retching, taking cover. Me to discover the past like flowers dying. I am alone and simply crying. For many years, I didn't...
You write happy poetry, though, too.
Yeah, I do. I can end with a happy one. What do I have?
Okay, I just want. Yeah.
No, I do. I have.
Mine are pretty dark, also, and I know Gloria is very dark.
Yeah,
she's very dark.
And she and I laugh all the time when we get together. My God, I really.
We published a book of her years ago. It was called Bloodsoaked Dresses.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
Those are great poems.
Yeah.
Her work is beautiful.
Yeah.
So this is from my friend Lisa Levine, who's a photographer, and it's. Our mothers were friends, and we've known each other since we were little girls. And this is from a photo of hers called Brighton Beach Was Never Venice. So this is my response. Green water, South Pacific or Adriatic. Dream water, Grand Canal to Carnival. The masks they wore were not made in Italy intermittent, mother tender water masks where they could not go. Brighton Beach, it beckons still, water wave, crashing save, still from the rocky reef refuge the teeming shoreline left behind. An ocean supported, surrendered between 2 world wars and a generation. Lost, they swam with the fishes, watched the man in white who sold knishes, and fed us from their wedding dishes. Sea salty air and shoulders bare, Brighton Beach was never Venice. So I think I'll read this poem for my father, and then I'll end with a happy one.
Oh, not that I care.
No. I brought it to end with.
Okay.
It's a little holiday piece here.
Yeah.
So this is for my father, and it's he didn't live in Samarkand, but I had a really weird dream when he was dying, so that's the name of it. I've been to Samarkand for my father. 2 years ago, May now as you made yourself ready for death, I wanted to remain, relieve her of her duty, and be a good daughter. You sent me home to die with her alone. I have been to Samarkand that final time, a journey by water, the dream geography more full than life, the mosque, the church, the covered women singing, the stations of the cross, the goblin boat to take me back by morning. I travel by train north and walk to the park. It's hot and burning, to see the icons at the Met, to look into the eyes of each and every opalescent virgin. In the houses of the Father, she guides the souls in comfort to Samara. Her eyes follow me. At home, I present you a gift, war traveler who prayed at every house of the Father, St. Sophia's in Kiev, the Friday Mosque of Tashkent, the Bukharian synagogue on Sepirnoye Street, the tomb of the prophet Daniel, where his stolen bones grow the stops along the bloody way, in Iran, Iraq, and Syria, then Lebanon, in Egypt and Palestine, in Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity, where the Ottoman Turks had made the doorways 4 feet high to keep the wild horsemen out, to Jerusalem, where they meet God as 3, a trinity of one almighty city to destroy the houses of the Father, a caravanserai on the journey backwards to Samara. You put messages in the wall, went to the Holy Sepulchre, and stumbled along the Via Dolorosa, saw the dome of the rock where Muhammad rode a winged stallion to heaven. Across the Mediterranean in Monte Cassino, you protected the mountain, then the monastery, and in Rome lifted your face to the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Now hear the word of God, as the pain goes through you like hot lead, as your bones move lengthwise into sleep upon the bed. I have brought you your last book, in prescience and redemption, in secret and in silence. Open it alone, look. Study the compassionate face of Mary, the distant face of Christ, the icons we cannot escape, imprinted on us since baptism. I hear you pray, and I pray too, for your life that spanned the century. Let the light hold fast. Enter Hagia Sophia, the final house of the Father. Go then, backwards to Samara. Leave your shoes at the door. See Christ who never was removed before your destiny is achieved. Explore. Arise and go, Vladimir, for the kingdom of heaven is upon you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Pleasure to have you on Poet to Poet, Writer to Writer.